In 1958, a steelworker in Pennsylvania retired at 54 with no pension, no stock portfolio, and a paid-off house worth more than most of his co-workers earned in a decade. He never made more than $5,000 a year. The habit that made it possible is number 4 on this list, and it costs nothing to start. Number 11 was taught at kitchen tables for 200 years before banks made it disappear. These were not secrets. They were the things your grandmother knew. Before we start, hit that subscribe button, because what your elders understood about money is worth more than most advice you will pay for today. Number 18, the mending basket. In every American home before 1960, a basket sat by the chair filled with socks needing darning and shirts missing buttons. Your grandmother did not throw away a shirt because a seam split. She fixed it while the radio played, and that shirt lasted another 5 years. A spool of thread cost a nickel in 1950. A new work shirt cost $2, nearly half a day's wages. A single evening of mending across a year saved a family the equivalent of a week's pay. Clothing was an asset to maintain, not a disposable good. Today, the average American throws away roughly 80 pounds of textiles a year, most of it repairable. The mending basket did not disappear because clothes got cheaper. It disappeared because we stopped seeing the value sitting in our own hands. Number 17, keeping a household ledger. Long before budgeting apps, your grandmother kept a small notebook where every cent that entered or left the house was written down. Bread, 11 cents. Thread, a nickel. She tallied it weekly, and she knew exactly where the money went because she had written it down with her own hand. A 1949 study of working-class families found that those who kept written accounts saved nearly twice as much as those who did not, at identical incomes. The act of writing each purchase created a friction that no automatic payment ever will. When you have to record that you spent 40 cents on candy, you buy less candy. Today, money flows through a dozen invisible accounts, and most people cannot say where it went last month. Your grandmother could tell you to the penny. Number 16, the pantry as a savings account. Your grandmother's pantry was a strategy. She bought flour, sugar, salt, and dried beans in volume when prices were low and stored months of it. A full pantry meant a family could ride out a layoff or a bad winter without borrowing a dime. In 1955, a household that bought staples in bulk spent roughly 20% less on food than one that bought week to week. The pantry was also insurance. When the breadwinner lost work, the family did not panic because a month of meals sat already paid for on the shelf. We replaced this with just-in-time grocery runs and credit cards, trading resilience for convenience. The pantry was a buffer between your family and disaster, built one sack of flour at a time. Number 15, the line between wants and needs. Your grandfather could tell you the difference between something he wanted and something he needed, and hold that line for years. A new hat was a want. A roof that did not leak was a need. He waited on the wants and attacked the needs. The entire machinery of modern marketing exists to erase exactly this distinction, to convince you that a want is a need and that you deserve it right now. Your grandfather was immune because he had been raised to ask one question before any purchase. Can I do without this? Usually the answer was yes, and the dollar stayed in his pocket. That single question, asked thousands of times across a lifetime, was worth more than any raise. Number 14. The cash cushion. Before everyone trusted their entire financial life to institutions, families kept a reserve of physical cash hidden at home. Not their whole savings, but enough to survive a crisis. The generation that lived through the 1930s, when thousands of banks collapsed and depositors lost everything, never forgot the lesson. Cash in hand could not be frozen or lost to a failing institution. A family with a few $100s tucked away could handle a medical emergency or a job loss without reaching for credit at brutal interest. This was not paranoia. It was the memory of a generation that had watched the system fail. Today, most Americans cannot cover a $400 emergency without borrowing. Your grandparents kept that cushion so they would never have to. First pattern break. Notice what every habit so far has in common. They are all about creating a margin between what comes in and what goes out, then protecting it with discipline. The next batch goes further, because your grandparents did not just save money. They built systems that made money work without them. Number 13. The backyard working as one system. Your grandparents saw the backyard as a small factory. The chickens ate kitchen scraps and produced eggs. The garden produced vegetables and fed scraps to the chickens. The cow, if they had one, produced milk and manure that fertilized the garden. Each piece fed the others at almost no cost. A family with a garden, a dozen hens, and a single cow in 1950 could cover a substantial share of their grocery bill and sell eggs and butter besides. The genius was in the loop, where nothing was wasted and each part made the others more productive. We dismantled this into separate purchases, paying retail markup at every step. Your grandmother ran a closed system that paid her instead. Number 12. Buying quality once instead of cheap repeatedly. Your grandfather bought one good pair of boots and resold them for 20 years. He bought a cast iron skillet that his granddaughter still cooks with today. Cheap things cost more over time because you buy them again and again. A good wool coat in 1955 cost a week's wages but lasted 30 years. The cheap version cost a quarter as much and fell apart in two. Over a lifetime, the man who bought quality once spent far less than the man who bought cheap repeatedly. Today, we are trained to buy disposable goods and replace them constantly, mistaking the low sticker price for savings. Your grandfather knew the real price was paid over time. Number 11. Lending within the family. Before consumer credit became universal, families were their own banks. When a young couple needed money for a down payment, they did not go to a lender at 18%. They went to family. The loan was repaid at a fair rate or no rate at all, with the interest staying inside the family instead of flowing to a corporation. This kept enormous sums of wealth circulating within families across generations instead of leaking out to institutions. $1,000 lent from a grandfather to a grandson, repaid and lent again, did the work that banks now charge dearly to perform. The family banking tradition faded as credit became easy and impersonal, and with it went one of the most powerful wealth-keeping mechanisms ordinary people ever had. Number 10. The Sunday Plan. Every Sunday in millions of American homes, the family sat down and planned the week. What meals would be cooked from what was on hand? What errands could be combined into a single trip? What bills were coming? This was a weekly operating meeting for the household economy. Planning meals around the pantry eliminated waste. Combining errands saved fuel. A family that planned its week spent dramatically less than one that improvised, because improvisation is expensive. Every unplanned trip to the store ends with things you did not need. Your grandparents treated the household like the serious enterprise it was, and they ran it on a schedule. Second pattern break. Here is the thread running through all of this. Your grandparents did not have more money than we do. What they had was a culture of habits so consistent and so deeply taught that the habits did the work automatically. The final ones are where those small disciplines compounded into something that lasted generations. Number 9, treating thrift as a virtue. In your grandparents' world, being careful with money was a sign of good character, not deprivation. The man who wasted money was looked down on. The woman who stretched $1 was praised for her skill. This framing meant thrift required no sacrifice of pride. It was the prideful thing to do. Today, the message is reversed, where spending signals success and frugality signals failure. Your grandparents wore the patched coat and the old car as badges of competence. They knew the neighbor flashing new things was usually drowning in debt, and the quiet ones with worn shoes often owned their homes outright. The value system itself was a wealth-building tool. Number 8. The cash crop plot. Beyond feeding the family, many households grew a deliberate surplus to sell. An extra row of tomatoes, a patch of strawberries, a stand of sweet corn, all grown to bring in cash at the roadside stand. The seeds cost pennies, and the labor was the children's after school. A modest plot could bring in real money across a season. Money that went straight into savings because it cost almost nothing to produce. This taught children that land and labor could be turned directly into income without an employer. A lesson that shaped how they thought about money for life. The roadside stand was a first business for countless families, run by kids who learned to count profit before they were 10. Number 7. Getting full value from everything. In your grandmother's house, nothing had a single life. Flour sacks became dresses and dish towels. Worn sheets were cut into pillowcases and then into rags. The bone from Sunday's roast became Monday's soup. A flour company in the 1930s actually started printing its sacks in floral patterns because they knew women were sewing them into clothing. Every object was asked to give all it had before it was discarded, and the cumulative savings were enormous. We pay for the first use and discard the rest. Your grandmother got 3 uses out of 1 purchase. Number 6, the apprenticeship instead of the loan. When your grandfather wanted his son to have a future, he did not assume the answer was an expensive degree paid for with decades of debt. Often the path was an apprenticeship, where a young man learned a trade alongside a master, earning while he learned, and emerging with a skill that could feed a family for life. The electrician, the plumber, the machinist entered their trades owing nothing and earning from the start. The skill itself was the asset, and it could never be repossessed or made obsolete by a market crash. A young tradesman in 1955 could be earning a solid living at 20, while his college-bound peers were years from their first paycheck. Only now are families rediscovering that a skilled trade is one of the surest routes to a stable, well-paid life. Number 5. Pre-funding the certainties. Your grandparents put money aside for the hard certainties of life before they arrived. A small fund for the funeral everyone knew would come. A jar for the winter coat the children would need. A reserve for the doctor's visit that could not be predicted but could be expected. The family that had quietly saved for a funeral did not have to borrow in the middle of grief. The one with a coat fund did not put winter clothes on credit. This habit of pre-funding the predictable expenses of life meant the moments that bankrupt modern families were handled with a quiet withdrawal from a jar that had been filling for years. Number 4. Paying yourself first. The steelworker from the beginning of this list did one thing without fail. The day his pay came, before a single bill was touched, he set aside a fixed portion into savings, and he lived on what remained. The principle is that savings cannot be what is left over, because there is never anything left over. Savings must come first, off the top. A worker who saved 10% before paying bills, every payday for 40 years, built a fortune on a modest wage through nothing but order of operations. The money set aside first was never missed, because the household adjusted to live on the rest. We pay everyone else first and try to save the remainder, and the remainder is always zero. Your grandparents reversed the order, and that reversal was everything. Number 3. The long memory of hard times. Your grandparents carried the Depression and the war in their bones, and that memory governed every decision. They had watched fortunes vanish and proud men stand in breadlines, and they never forgot that prosperity is not guaranteed. They saved aggressively when times were good, precisely because they had lived through times that were not. They distrusted easy credit and get-rich schemes because they had watched both destroy people they knew. We have lived through a long enough stretch of ease that this memory has faded, and with it, the instinct to prepare. Your grandparents would tell you that the most dangerous moment is when you believe the hard times cannot return. Number 2. Raising children who could do for themselves. Your grandparents aimed to give their children a capable life, not an easy one. A child in that house learned to cook a meal from scratch, mend a garment, grow a vegetable, and manage $1 before they left home. A young adult who could do for themselves needed far less money to live well, because they could produce instead of purchase and fix instead of replace. The capability itself was the inheritance, worth more than any sum of cash because it could never be spent or lost. We have largely stopped passing down these skills, and so we have raised generations who must pay for every single thing their grandparents could simply do. The most valuable thing they handed down was not money, it was competence. Number 1. The home owned free and clear. Every habit on this list pointed toward a single destination: a home owned outright, with no payment owed to anyone. They made extra payments when they could. They skipped the new car and the vacation to throw a lump sum at the principal. A paid-off home was not just shelter, but the cornerstone of all financial freedom, the thing that made it possible to weather any storm, retire on little, and pass something real to the next generation. A family with no mortgage needed only a fraction of the income to live securely, which meant they could survive a job loss or simply rest in a way the indebted never can. The day the mortgage was paid was the day the family truly owned its future. Your grandparents knew this in their bones. Now you know it too. The only question left is whether you will live the way they did or just admire it from a distance. Pick one habit from this list and start it this week. Then come back and tell me whether your grandmother was wrong.